Welcome to Non-Obvious with Hugh Hansen.
Yes, welcome everybody, and welcome Brad. It's great to have you here. Brad and I go back a long way, early on, and I've been impressed with him from the beginning. It's almost kind of sad how impressed I've been with him on a consistent basis, and he just does more good things every year. So I'm a little concerned that are you having any time for fun?
Um, every day is fun, Hugh. Is in all seriousness, it really is. I mean, I thoroughly enjoy what I get to do, both at work and at home. It's a busy pace, but I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Okay, great. Okay, let's start out a little bit with your up, where you were born and all. So you're from Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Yep.
Uh, your father was an engineer and manager with Wisconsin Bell. Your mom was an elementary school teacher. Now, uh, were you at all intrigued by the technology and stuff your father doing, or you were just a basic arts and BA type person as a child?
I think growing up, I was frankly most interested in politics and things like that. But I was exposed to technology. My dad worked in the telephone industry. Because he worked for Wisconsin Bell, he had a car phone, as it was called at the time, before those kinds of things were even in the popular imagination. So I had some exposure to that, but it was really when I got to college that I probably got more interested in technology.
All right. And your mother, was she at all interested in politics and policy?
No, my mom was really all about people. And frankly, raising her kids to work hard, aim high, and do the right thing. But my mom, who passed away a few years ago, never had an email address. My father did, and she relied on him to send the email, and she was happy to tell him what to say. But she was, but she loved knowing what I was up to, and always had questions about that. But my dad easily took on the personal computer when it came out and other things like that. But that was his thing, not my mom's.
All right. There's an interesting thing here. Your childhood hero was Bob Gibson of the St. Louis Cardinals. How did that happen?
Yeah, he absolutely was. It was fascinating. When I was living, as a kid at the time in southeastern Wisconsin, there was a stretch where Milwaukee didn't have a professional baseball team. The Braves had left for Atlanta. The Brewers hadn't yet been born or come from Seattle. And my dad had grown up in Missouri, so it was easy to root for the Cardinals. I got interested in them, and Bob Gibson was the man. But what really interested me in Bob Gibson was when he came out with an autobiography in 1969, I believe it was, and it was called From Ghetto to Glory, and it was about his growing up in Nebraska, in Omaha, and he overcame a lot of challenges. When I look back on it, I find it more interesting than perhaps I thought at the time, that here was this, very much a young white middle class kid who adopted, as his hero, an African American athlete, and I always was so inspired by how he overcame just an enormous amount of prejudice and discrimination to become one of the leaders in his field. And I always felt that if he could do that, then I could do anything, because my life was so much easier. I just didn't have his ability, but it put things in perspective. And I think, especially from the vantage point of the year 2020, I think it's not a bad perspective to have.
No, no. Actually, we have some interesting things that we share as we go along. I will. My childhood hero was Willie Mays,
Uh-huh.
the New York Giants, and then the San Francisco Giants, and it was wonderful. It's wonderful to have a childhood hero, actually. Uh, but there wasn't anything more than that. It was the sports and what he was doing, and was he was the person and the teams. But still, um, okay. So you went to you were president of the Student Faculty Association, both the junior and senior year.
That's
That
nice. Yeah.
nobody has ever done that before.
Yeah, no, I went to a large public high school in Appleton, Wisconsin, Appleton West. We had in those years 3 grades, sophomore, junior, senior, each had about 700 kids. And I had the gumption to run for student body president the spring of my sophomore year, meaning I would then serve my junior year. And I ran against a junior. So he was a year ahead of me. And it was what I'll always remember is in the couple weeks running up to it, my parents never asked me how it was going. I think they thought that I didn't have a shot in the world of winning this thing. And then lo and behold, I won. I still remember I got 61% of the vote. And I was down at the YMCA that evening, and I finally got home about 8 o'clock, and it had been on the election day. And they said, "Well, what happened?" And I said, "I won." And they were very happy for me. And they said, "You didn't call or tell us anything." And I sort of said, "Well, I didn't think you were that interested in it." And I think they were doing their best just to downplay expectations.
Uh, and then you were second year. You also were the uh, president of the Student Faculty Association, which, as I said, is pretty unusual. I'm beginning to think your whole life was unusual. You were also co-editor in chief of the school newspaper at the same time.
Yeah,
Uh,
thankfully nobody objected on the basis of conflict of interest. But yeah, my senior year, I was the student body
so
president.
you already were able to do a million things besides your main task of going to school. So early on, you were able to multitask and do it very well. Now, this is interesting. You're the props man uh, for the Little Abner play in which you had to wrangle a piglet every night. Tell us about that.
That was actually great fun. Yeah, I had a little bit of an interest in school theater, but I had absolutely no acting ability whatsoever. I did play a part in one play my senior year, and mostly I concluded that the only person I could ever play was myself. But I then went on to play a role as the props manager for Little Abner, which was a lot of fun just because it was a great way to be in a big play. It was a big production for our school. And yes, I had to go find a piglet from a local farmer so that the piglet could be in the play. And it was my job each day to drive out after school as the play ran to pick up the piglet and brought him in and then returned him after the play ended each night.
I have a feeling that the piglet was probably had a month of depression after the play ended. Where is Brad? Where is Brad? Mom, where is Brad? Anyway, so okay, you went from high school to Princeton, summa cum laude, which is, I understand, pretty good. Your senior thesis, The Politics of Refugees, the Development and Promotion of International Refugee Law. Now, I would imagine there weren't that many senior theses on that topic.
No, but it was something I was very interested in, and it's something that gave me a huge opportunity and a sort of shaped interest I've had ever since. And yeah, I actually think that my interest came out of something I had first happened upon growing up. When I was in what you call middle school, today in southeastern Wisconsin, there was an area nearby that had migrant farm workers every summer, and I actually on a couple of occasions went over and earned some odd money by literally being on my hands and knees and picking onions next to these kids who are migrant workers, and they showed me around their living quarters, and I saw their living conditions, and it got me very interested in what were the standards for migrants. it was an issue that I had pursued in high school, learned more about, and then when I got to college, I was very interested in refugee issues. So we all at Princeton had to do a senior thesis. It was sort of the pinnacle, if you will, and it was like 100-page plus research paper. And I applied for a scholarship that I got, which gave me the opportunity to fly to Geneva, Switzerland, and interview the people who worked at the UN High Commission for Refugees. It was my first trip to Europe. I had never had that opportunity. And I just loved it. Loved the opportunity to work on the issue, and came away with a passion for the needs of refugees that I've pursued ever since, including in pro bono work and work that I continue to do today.
So there's some truth to the child is father of the man. Early influences, yeah,
Yeah.
great. And so somewhere in there, you met Kathy, your wife,
Yep.
and you've been together since college, I guess, right?
Yeah, as I always say, we were in the same class, and I started dating her our sophomore year, and she finally started dating me our junior year. And yes, oh, and we, she did her senior thesis on another aspect of the United Nations and the UN and the rights of women. So we had similar interests, which was really nice.
That's great. And then you went to Geneva for a year.
Yeah, basically what we did is both Kathy and I got into Columbia Law School. At that point, we were both going to go wherever was the right place for each of us individually, and happily it ended up being the same place. And we got married after our second year of law school and spent a year off before going back and finishing. And we spent that year studying at the Graduate Institute of International Studies in Geneva. We studied international law and international economics.
And to what extent was this more of an academic experience, or was it tied into the real world, or and did it have any influence on you, what you can do now?
Well, I mean, first of all, it was an academic experience. We had a friend who had gone before, who we knew and had recommended it. So it was very much an academic experience. The Graduate Institute is now quite a large institution. When we were there, it was small. We moved ourselves over to Geneva. Didn't have a whole lot of money, but enough to get by. We each bought these little mopeds, two red mopeds. People would always joke that they would know that where we were if our mopeds were parked outside the library. And we both loved the experience. We loved the students that we got to meet. We loved the opportunity we had to travel during the holiday seasons over there. And we would study both at the Institute, but also at the Library for the United Nations, the Palais des Nations, the UN headquarters in Geneva. I will always remember sort of chugging up the hill on my moped in the middle of a snowstorm, because I was from Wisconsin. It never occurred to me that I would stay home just because it was snowing. Had my pass and got up to the library, and there was the UN police officer looking at me and chuckling. And I said hello, and he goes, "You must be American." And I said, "Yes, I am." And but we got a huge amount out of the experience, and it gave me, among other things, this enormous appreciation for the role of multilateralism, the history of the international institutions in Geneva, the opportunities that I thought the world had to do more things if it could find a way to do them more collaboratively and together. And that's another thing I think I've carried with me ever since.
Yeah, this is getting a little interesting, because I actually spent time in Geneva because my aunt worked in the UN, and I'd go over and visit, and I was enthralled then with the UN and what it could do and everything else. I'm a little disappointed it seems to have gone less of a player, and I guess that's to be expected at some time, but I thought it was great people and a great experience. And I love Geneva also. Okay, you graduate from Columbia. You clerk for Judge Metzner. I happen to know Judge Metzner because I clerked for Judge Wyatt and Judge Gerfine, and he was a big friend of Judge Wyatt. I thought. And how did that year be?
I really enjoyed my year clerking. It was in the Southern District of New York. It was a district clerkship, and as there was this generation of federal judges in New York. I think they were great judges. They were tough on the lawyers in front of them. Judge Metzner was a wonderful person, and he really taught me so much about how to think and write like a lawyer. I realized that the first week when I produced something and he was less than enthused about what I had written. And so, he instilled in me very quickly, the kind of self-discipline that I think, frankly, is needed to just think through things in a rigorous way. I learned a lot, in part about technology in that context. I brought a PC into the chambers, something that was new. So he had a filing system that literally had served him well for 3 decades. So I had to figure out where I could use my PC and where my PC wasn't welcome, because things already worked extremely well. But I figured that one out, and I will always remember Judge Metzner, as some of the other judges at that time. If a lawyer was disagreeing with them in their courtroom, the judge sort of told the lawyer, how they had it wrong. Judge Metzner had sometimes a little bit of a tendency of, if he explained to the lawyer what the lawyer was doing wrong and the lawyer still objected, then Judge Metzner said the same thing again, only louder. As I once said to him when we took a break, I said, Judge, it's not because he can't hear you. It's because he's not prepared to agree. But it was this awesome experience in terms of learning about how a real court works with real cases.
All right, so then you join Covington Burling, of course, a fantastic firm in DC. So they were in New York and DC at the time, right?
No, they were only in DC.
Oh, okay.
This was before they were in New York. They were really just in one office at that time when I joined them in DC.
And how was that experience?
It was great. I mean, I wanted to go to DC because I had gotten so interested in, broader public issues, public policy, regulatory issues. A lot of this was really, frankly, the influence of what we had been exposed to in Geneva. And I loved the fact that the firm then, as now, you made it possible for you to do more than one thing at a time. So I did litigation, I did antitrust and other litigation, but I also had the chance to work on a variety of other issues with other lawyers and other practice groups. And the most important thing I got, frankly, was what I think is the most important thing any lawyer can get right out of law school, which is fantastic training. And I am forever grateful for the partners I had the chance to work with. One in particular, a great litigator named Bill Iverson, would take what I wrote and mark it all up, print it out, and he would just edit it with a red pen. But then he would come, I would always remember, he would walk up to my office, pull up a chair next to me, and go through every edit and explain why he made it. And it was just like, and it was great for him. It was great for me because I was less likely to make the same mistake twice if somebody actually walked me through what I had done and how I could do it better. I worked my tail off, but it was a lot of fun and I learned one heck of a lot.
How did you like DC?
I loved it. I've always enjoyed being in DC. And it was a great place to work. Kathy and I really enjoyed living there. We were there for 3 years, and I've always enjoyed going back.
Where did you live in DC?
We lived up near American University in what's called AU Park, American University Park, and it was our first house, and it was a very middle income, comfortable, nice neighborhood, and yet it was close to the metro. It was close to downtown by car.
Okay, then you go with Covington Burling, go to London. What caused that?
Well, it was really the Geneva background, if you will. It gave Kathy and me both this long-standing interest of going back to Europe if the opportunity ever arose. She was at Gibson Dunn and Crutcher. They had a London office. Covington had just opened one. It was their first office outside of DC. And so I expressed an interest in going there, and going from this very much establishment firm in DC to this classic startup of an enterprise. I was lawyer number 3 instead of lawyer number 250 in the office. And I was just so fortunate, Hugh, in the sense that I ended up with this wonderful opportunity to start doing work for the software industry.
Oh, so this London office directly connected to working, software publishers or what was it?
As it turned out, and I was lucky, and I think in hindsight you could say I also helped make my own luck. And it's a story that I often share with people who are in law school or early in their career. I had a mentor, a partner, a fellow named Jim Atwood, who was a partner at Covington. Talk about what a great job as a mentor. He walked into my office in February of 1989, and he said, "You're going to the London office, and I just got this intellectual property bulletin, and it said that the European Commission is considering this software copyright directive." And he said, maybe you want to write a memo for business development purposes, because I know you like computers. I had a reputation for liking computers, using them. This might be something you want to learn about. I said, hey, that sounds good. And it was a Friday morning, first thing in the morning, before President's Day weekend. And so I walked down to the 8th floor, where there was a person who had just left Covington, a guy named Doug Phillips, who was the first head of what was called at the time the Business Software Alliance. It had the 6 software publishers. It had Microsoft, Lotus, WordPerfect, Aldus, Adobe. And I walked into his office and I said, hey, there's this newsletter. It says that there's this proposal coming out of Europe. Do you happen to have it? And he said, yes, I do. And he had it, he printed out, and he said, here, you can take a copy. And I said, hey, Jim Atwood suggested maybe I should write a memo for business development purposes. And Doug said, hey, if you want to do a memo for me, I'll circulate it to the software companies. I said, deal. I wasn't going to get paid for it, but I said, I'd be happy to do it. And then he said to me, there's only one catch. I said, what's that? He goes, I need it by Tuesday morning. I said, okay. Well, I sort of gulped, because this was now at about 10 o'clock in the morning. And Kathy and I were scheduled to take a 1 p.m. flight down to Florida for President's Day weekend. So I said, okay, I'll do it. And what you have to know is I never took any intellectual property class in law school. I didn't know the first thing about, I sort of knew what a copyright was because I'd read books, but that was about the extent of it. I walked up to the Covington Law Library, pulled out these 2 big litigation bags, filled it up with treatises on copyright law, checked out a very heavy laptop, because that's all you had at the time, so I could do some work. Met Kathy at the airport. We flew down to Florida. On Saturday, I spent the whole day next to a pool reading all of this stuff. On Sunday, we went to Disney World. On Monday, I just got up early and spent the whole day writing a memo, with recommendations for the software industry about what the changes it should, either endorse or seek in this proposed copyright directive. We flew out back Monday night. Tuesday morning, I handed in the 10-page memo, and Doug Phillips sent it off to the software companies. And thank goodness, at least one person read it. And the person who read it was, at the time, the chief international counsel at Microsoft. And he picked up the phone and called Doug, and he said, "This memo is really good. We ought to give this guy some additional work and see what he can do." And that's was my introduction to the software industry.
That's great. The rest is history. And poor Kathy's been putting up with this, taking work on every vacation probably. Uh, but
I may not give her the link to this podcast, Hugh.
but okay. So, and the reason, I'm just telling our audience, Brad is not going to discuss this, but one of the most important things in his life happened as a result of this move to London and doing software, because the commission was doing hearings on, I forget actually what the issue was, maybe moral rights or something, but and I was an academic and I was hanging around when I went there, and they let me, but they couldn't let me in there because you had to be already authorized as a player corporation or something. So they called up Brad and said, "Look, we got this academic from New York. We can't let him in, but you have 2 seats. You're only going to take 1. Is it okay if he just sits there and doesn't say anything?"
Yep.
Which is what I do the best. And yeah, and so that was good. And that's we met, and very happy to say we had lots of things to do together over the years.
Yeah, I remember that meeting actually like it was yesterday. Because you're absolutely right. It was in a big conference room in Brussels in the European Commission, and I had a spare seat because I was there to represent the BSA and speak for the U.S. software industry, and that's where we met.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, now I think we're getting close to the time where we actually have to get more substantive. Now, you're doing IP because you're such in demand. You've abandoned IP now. Do you miss it?
I get to stay connected to intellectual property issues today through our IP team, and I'm able to follow the issues from afar. Um, I like the fact that I get to stay abreast of where it is today and what some of the issues are, at least those that affect a company like Microsoft the most. But you're right. I mean, in an era of specialization, and I think that's the era in which we live. I spent my first several years working in the legal field for Microsoft, for other software companies, with a real specialization around IP. And I don't have that level of depth anymore, but I don't think I miss it for the simple reason that I feel like I've got other people that I know are so capable in addressing it. We have a person, Jennifer Yokoyama, who leads our intellectual property group today. And, if there's ever a question to which I don't have the answer, I know where to get it, and I get it right away. And then I have the opportunity to weave that together with lots of other things that are going on. And that's sort of my job in so many ways, is to weave lots of different strands from different fields together, rather than be the person that goes really deep on any one of them in particular.
Let me ask, in terms of IP or the practice of law, to what extent today, as opposed to when you started out, or even when we were in London, has that changed, or is it pretty much the same?
I feel like I'm a really bad person to ask because, I know what it was like to be a junior lawyer 3 decades ago, and I know what it's like to have a job like mine today. I don't actually know what it's like to be a junior lawyer starting out today. I always love talking to people, and I do get a glimpse of it. My son is a 3rd-year law student at Columbia today. So I listen to him. And I think that the most important thing that I would say that I think was true for me and is true for anyone today is you really need to just find a way to take advantage of every opportunity that comes your way. I did some projects my first year or two at Covington that by any broad perspective you look at and say, wow, that was like really boring. I mean, literally, one of my first projects was to sit in a file room in Washington, D.C., and use a tape recorder to record a summary of 110,000 pages of documents, something that computers basically do today. But I figured out how to make it fun. I was my goal to make it fun, figure out, how to do it. I was like, well, if I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to figure out how to do it better than anybody ever has done this before. And I just sort of made that my goal. And I learned from it. And because I did it, reasonably well or better, somebody said, hey, we're going to give you a bigger project. And I just think that's probably the nature of every profession in every era. You're never going to do your most exciting work your first year out of school. That's a good thing. Otherwise, life is going to peak awfully early. You have to pay your dues at some level, and you have to find a way to do it well, learn everything you can, and make it fun. And so I think a lot of specifics have changed for people starting out in the law today, but I suspect that has not.
All right. In terms of the role of IP, the people who are in it, it used to be that the IP people were in the office without a window, and all the action was going on. And then, of course, IP products could be sold and globalization, and that changed everything. And then it became very important just from a financial standpoint. But do you need, how much do you have to know about the real deep IP to be able to participate in a way that can make a difference? I mean, is it basically now another type of business and that's it? And those things will determine what you do? Or is it basically a bunch of stuff that most people don't know anything about and never will know anything about, and it's off by itself?
Well, I think it's almost all of the above. I first think that if you work in the tech sector, and especially if you're a lawyer in the tech sector, it's really important to have some background in intellectual property, because it is ultimately, in many ways, the intellectual property laws and rights that define the value of the products we create. I always think it's interesting to think about IP as not one thing, but really four. It's copyright, it's patents, it's trademark, and it's trade secrets. And for software, those four different fields serve very different purposes. From my perspective, copyright plays a fundamental role in making sure that somebody can't get a hold of your source code and just create a wholesale copy of what you're doing. Patent law plays an important role in protecting and ultimately licensing in different ways some of the fundamental inventions that give a product value. Trademark is really what we use, interestingly enough, today, not just to fight against counterfeits, which we've been fighting forever, but actually it serves a role in even helping us protect cybersecurity in ways that are not entirely intuitive or obvious, but are fundamental. And trade secrets more and more are quite important, especially in an era of cloud computing, when you may have inventions or code that may not always qualify for patent protection, but you do need to keep it in some instances secret. They're in your data centers. So all four of them come together. And what that really means is at one level you have specialists in each of the four areas. They need to go deep. It's of vital importance that we have just world-class lawyers at a company like Microsoft in each of these four fields. Then you need to have people who understand how the four fields fit together with each other. And then fundamentally, you need people like that do what I do today, which is ask from an even higher altitude, how are the intellectual property issues going to intersect with the antitrust issues or the cybersecurity issues? Or a lot of other broader issues that we're working to address.
Um, uh, Oracle v. Google. By the way, that's a case. I don't know if you've heard of that case, but a lot of people think it could be one of the most important cases in copyright in a long time, depending on which way they go. Do you have any views on that case, or?
Yeah, no, we've authored an amicus brief. We've sided with Google in the case, although we've
You
offered.
know, let me just say that if there is a God, you'll be punished for that. Okay.
No, I mean, I think that we offered an argument for the court that some might regard as less far-reaching than some of the arguments made by others in the case, perhaps even Google itself in some.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
But I do think that ultimately, in copyright especially, there has been around since the 1980s. How far copyright should go beyond in protecting things beyond the literal copying of source code, and especially things like software interfaces. This was at the heart of the work that I did when I first arrived in London, and then made all these trips to Brussels. It's always required a balance. I'm hopeful that the Supreme Court will decide the case in Google's favor, but with the recognition of the balance that is needed.
Okay. Well, we should be knowing pretty soon. Of course, you're not going to predict publicly because you don't want to be in the losing side of a public. I actually think I didn't know what the Supreme Court was going to do. My guess is they're going to say it's copyrightable, and the only issue is what they do if they do anything with fair use. But we'll see. To some extent, and I always thought that you and Microsoft, and this showed it too, but the tech people are almost in their own world, of which they have their own rules. It's like choreographers are in their world, music industries in their world, and the culture creates things that people do that may or may not comply with the law, because it doesn't, because everyone wants to do that. And it's only when you have a lawsuit, and this can happen in music or something else, you bring in an outsider or an estate or something, that all of a sudden things are maybe shaken up a little bit or maybe not. And I have to say, I think of the hardcore tech, the startups and all, are definitely, and it's wonderful, they create all this stuff, but the actual development of the law is less important than actually what the technology can do or not. And I think when I became interested in IP, and my generation became interested in IP because we were creative wannabes. I wanted to be a novelist. Other people wanted to be a singer or something like that. Now, the people, my colleagues in IP who teach, they come to it because from the tech side, and they see as IP as the problem, the ghost in the machine. And rather than, yes, IP is very important, everything else is, maybe we'll put up with IP, but the culture of the public domain a little bit. But we're all, to some extent, doing things that flow naturally from us. So we'll see. I mean, that's why I think this case is very important, because my generation is dying out. The tech people, they're all ridiculously young and everything else. So this case could be incredibly important, depending on what the Supreme Court does. Anyway, we'll see what they do. And when you in your second podcast, we can discuss it. Okay. Tools and weapons. I love the title. The Promise and Peril of Digital Age, with Caroline Brown as your co-author. I think, and I don't actually read a lot of books, like maybe my articles and other things, posts, and but it's almost sounds trite or something else, but I really couldn't put this book down. I thought it was fantastic.
Well, thank
Uh, and I actually give it to my students. I used to just bring in a box full of these things, but now I say, if you want it, I'll give me your email, and we'll get it sent to it. And so it's gone down a bit, but I think there are at least 10 people who have received the book. And by the way, at the end of this thing, I'm going to give you a bill. But so I think it's incredible, and it's incredibly insightful. So what actually caused you to do this book?
Well, Carolyn Brown, who you mentioned, is now my chief of staff and manages all my communications. And we've worked together on a variety of things over the last several years. And if there's a thread that runs throughout it, it has often been trying to convey to a broader audience the issues and the concerns that we're trying to address. And we live at a time where we feel that digital technology really has become, on the one hand, the most powerful tool for addressing almost any issue or problem in the world. And at the same time, it really has become perhaps the world's most formidable weapon uh, in, in so many ways, either literally as a weapon in the cyber attack context, or just a cause of increasing societal divides in so many ways. And we wrote the book in part because we wanted to make all of these issues more accessible and we hope more interesting to people. We wanted to give people the ability to think about the issues of today through the lens of sort of history and other experiences and inventions that give us, in our view, insights that can be applied. And we wrote the book for two other reasons. We really wanted to make the case that the tech sector needs to step up and assume more responsibility. We felt that governments need to move faster. They need to speed up. We need a world where there are more laws to address the issues that technology is creating.
All right. And what is the last chapter sort of goes through it, and probably you're saying it could go either way.
Well, people often ask us, are we optimistic or pessimistic about the future? And I always like to say we're determined. At the end of the day, I don't think it actually matters whether you're optimistic or pessimistic nearly as much as whether you're determined to make a difference. And I think if people of goodwill and real thoughtfulness are determined to come together, work together, and have a positive impact, then everybody can get optimistic. But optimism without determination usually leads to good feeling, but no real change in the world.
How important is it, as you have, to be able to speak to a government leader about these issues? Most of us can't, and I mean, what can the general public do, or is it just really leaders have to get their act together?
No, I think it's all of us, actually. I mean, and we all have a vote, we all have a voice, we all get to learn more and share our views. Um, in a way, Hugh, I think it's an interesting almost set of bookends. I mean, if I go back to the time when you and I first met each other, technology issues were not mainstream issues. They were almost completely confined to intellectual property. Privacy as a field wasn't even born at that time. It was, as you put it, the people who got the offices without windows. You would never imagine that the issues that we were listening to in that conference room in Brussels would ever be on the agenda of a prime minister or a head of state. And here we are today, 30 years later, and these, in so many ways, are the leading issues of our time. they impact everybody. They impact every aspect of society, not just obviously IP, but access to broadband, the skills that people need to get jobs, the protection of cybersecurity, privacy, the role of social media. I mean, these are among the issues that shape everyone's community. So I do think that it's important for people to learn about them and formulate an opinion. That's part of why we wrote the book. But the other reason we wrote the book was to reach leaders, whether it be leaders in business or leaders in government. Yeah, one of my moments when I smiled this past year was not just when we gave a copy of the book to Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, but when I then saw a photograph of her in her office, and there was our book on her bookshelf. So we do need to use our voice as leaders. I think, hopefully, thoughtful leaders who are thinking about more than just our self-interest, but broadly about what will serve the public, if we're going to address these issues well.
All right. I see you as someone who could have ended up as one of these leaders. And I think you would have been fantastic. Is it ever cross your mind now that somehow you want to get involved in government, whether electoral or others or something, or
Well, mostly I would say I love doing what I am doing now, and I love where I am doing it, and that's what I want to keep doing. I just think the opportunity to be a part of the creation of the technology and to bring into the technology creation process, these values, these perspectives, the liberal arts, if you will. I think that the world of technology, um, you know, benefits from having people who have these experiences. And I'm obviously not alone. I mean, there's lots of people across the tech sector today who are playing very important roles. And I think that the tech sector benefits from having people who can go take this message to governments and work with governments in a broad-minded way. And I just get to take so much initiative. One of the several things that we've done this past year is create what no company has uh, had before, a United Nations Affairs Office. So, we have one of our senior leaders, him, John Frank, who's now the head of our UN Affairs team. He's based in New York. We have someone else who you may know is longstanding person in our Brussels office. He's now our person in Geneva, Jean-Yves Art. And the ability to blaze some new trails and think about how the tech sector can better serve the UN, better be a voice for multilateralism. Try to take concrete steps to put technology to work to address some of these needs. It's a wonderful opportunity to get up every morning and work on these things. So I'm really in a position where I'm like, I get to multitask, as you say. I get to work on lots of different things with people I love working with. So for me, I really wouldn't want to be anywhere
yeah,
else.
I actually don't want you to go anywhere. I think your impact nationally and globally is really kind of incredible, and I'm very happy that you're the person doing that. So, and I'm glad at some point you probably cross your mind whether you'd run for office or something somewhere in this long history, I would imagine. Uh,
Yeah, but I'll just say if that was the right thing to do, I should have done it a decade or
oh
two.
no, no, no! I agree with totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Um, AI it scares a lot of people. It scares me. Um, as your book says, most people are saying, well, we just wanted to augment. But this Chinese company who's very frank about saying, well, we never even want to have a human. We're just all robots or whatever. Um, wh- what is the future with AI? Is it ultimately grim, or is it ultimately can be managed?
Well, I would say it's like almost everything else in life. The future will be what we make it. I think AI is going to continue to get better. It's going to become a more powerful tool. It's going to be able to do more things, and I'm willing to bet that it will help us find a cure for cancer. it will play a profound role in enabling us to reduce the amount of carbon that's emitted in the atmosphere. We're already seeing machine learning play just enormously important roles in addressing issues like that. And at the same time, it can create more powerful weapons for the militaries of the world. If it's not regulated and managed well, it can even take humans out of the loop. It really requires that we pay enormous attention to getting this right. I sometimes say, and I've had the chance to, as you know, do this around the world, not just with government leaders, but at the Vatican and the like. We are the first generation in the history of humanity to give machines the ability to make decisions that have always been made only by human beings. And if we fail to get this right, we run the risk that every generation that follows in our footsteps will pay the price for our mistakes. So we better do everything we can to get it right. So the stakes are, in some ways couldn't be higher. But I do believe we see emerging around the world, not just in the world of technology, but in the world of philosophy and religion and law and the like, you know, ethical principles. And a lot of what a tech company like Microsoft has to do is operationalize these principles so that AI is developed in an ethical way. And then what we really need to do is work with our customers around the world, because they are the ones who will deploy this. They are the ones who ultimately will decide how it is used in specific scenarios. So it's not enough for just tech companies to get it right. We have to take what we're learning, we have to transfer that learning to everybody else, and we need to be advocates, for self-restraint and self-responsibility, as well as for the kinds of laws that will ensure that bad actors are limited in the harm that they can wreak.
Right. All right. Let me ask you a specific thing about the legal profession. I'm a legal realist, and I came out believing in facts plus law equals result, thinking it was great because no one is above the law, no one's beneath the law. It's up to the legislatures to change, and everyone can act accordingly. But then, my clerkship with Judge White, he gave me some, look at this case, come back, and he said, Hugh, Jones is the good guy, right? And I'm saying to myself, it doesn't matter if he's the good guy. I didn't say this out loud or anything else, something else. And the other time he said something, Hugh, if you learn the facts, if you're in charge of the facts, the law will take care of itself. I said, I just spent 3 years learning the law. What do you mean it'll take care of itself? So he was considered a law judge. Now, what he's saying is, he's policy oriented. Good guy is one of the policies, the various policies, and he wanted to do justice. And so the judges, nowadays, everyone says that's the law. I think actually what they're doing is saying, I want justice in this particular. A fifth-year associate makes more than a chief justice of the United States. I didn't come here to make money. I didn't come here for fame and fortune. Nobody knows me except my mother's friends and the lawyers who appear before me. So I am here actually to do good. So now, assuming I'm right on that to some extent, AI can do facts plus law equals law very well, but this very intricate looking at all the parts of the puzzle, to produce a result, which I'm talking about federal judges now, I think do very well. Is AI going to be able to do that easily, or is that more?
I think we've seen computing automate a number of legal processes for several decades. It started with what secretaries did, and then it sort of moved up to what paralegals did. And today it is at the cusp of doing, to a certain degree, what some lawyers do. And I think it'll play a bigger role in the future than in the past. But I'll still say there are the creative leaps that are the difference between a good lawyer and a great one, and a good judge and a great one. And I don't know that I would necessarily endorse, as much as you the legal realism school, although I definitely know where you're coming from and I understand it. But when I put my shoes in what it means to be a lawyer, I think that sometimes when I think of some of the cases I've had the chance to work on over the years, it was the opportunity to look at a set of facts from a different vantage point and develop an argument that asked judges to innovate with the law, not because it was just the right outcome, but because it was the right outcome and it was consistent with long-standing principles. If you could just find the path to do that, then I think you could serve your client well, and I think you could serve society well at the same time. So, and I don't think we're going to find artificial intelligence in our lifetimes, including, say, people who are students in law schools today, where machines will be able to make those leaps. What I hope and what I aspire to is that machine learning will take off the shoulders of lawyers the work that is the least interesting and the least creative, while leaving to lawyers the opportunity to frankly find careers that are even more fulfilling than otherwise.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic, and that's how I like to think of it. All right, final area now, the digital divide. So the bunch of divide, there's a sophisticated divide, there's a techie, non-techie, and everyone is sort of being able to think things. And then you have economic divides that people, well, it's in your book, that people can't get broadband. To what extent do you see a future that the economic or educational or other inequalities can be addressed and helped through advances in technology or whatever?
Well, I think it's just essential that we do just that. We live in a country today that takes for granted that everyone has electricity, and with the exception of literally a very small number of people, sadly still some Native Americans on one or two locations, the whole country has electricity. We need a future where the whole country has broadband, because broadband, as we like to say, is the electricity of the 21st century. It is what we need to take us forward and give everybody access to the world. I mean, it is the world that you access now through broadband. I think we need to strengthen our public education systems in this country and innovate in those spaces so that everyone has access to the skills that are needed for jobs that increasingly have digital content, regardless of what kind of job it is. And I think if we close the broadband gap and eliminate the skills gap, we create a stronger foundation that will help us address the other divides that we worry about, the racial divides, the economic divides, the income inequality divides. It won't do that by themselves, but I don't think we can possibly succeed in these other areas if we leave the broadband and skilling divides where they are today. So in that sense, I think it's of fundamental importance.
Yeah. I guess one add-on to this, democracy. Would Hitler have been even more dominant with this technology, or would the technology have been ways to maybe stop him? Or, the modern day Hitler would, of course, is Trump. But that's just a joke, everybody. What about really a serious thing? I mean, breaking into and changing votes or whatever we're worried about. So technology and democracy, is the answer the same? We all just have to be vigilant and fight for what's right, or what?
Well, I think in some ways it's the same it's always been, and in other ways it's completely different. I think we should always recognize that democracy is a fragile thing. The ancient Athenians were not able to sustain it for more than 2 centuries. The Roman Republic, came to an end. This is a decade that will witness the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States of America. And it is going to have a long and bright future only if we do what the people who came before us did and stand up and at times even sacrifice what needs to be sacrificed in terms of our personal lives in order to ensure that democracy is protected. Now, in the world today, technology companies are on the front lines of the defense of democracy. Whether it's protecting candidates or campaigns or academics or think tanks or voters and voting roles in the fundamental democratic process, we better do our job well. If we don't do our job well, I think it becomes almost impossible for governments or others to make up for our deficiencies. So I think we're doing better. I think there's many hard questions in our future. But I think more than anything, we just have to be absolutely committed to the protection of democracy. There are 76 democratic nations in the world. 47% of the world's people live in it. That's 3.7 billion people. It is more people than have ever lived in the democratic societies than in the history of humanity, but it's as fragile as ever. And it will therefore persevere only as long as we are committed to its preservation.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Well, this has been fantastic. I've been told that
We're out of time, and I have a call.
that you have a call. Okay. Yeah. Well, you're a very busy person. The fact that you took this time out, I greatly appreciate. So thank you very much.